He's the president of the American Action Forum, the former director of the Congressional Budget Office. Welcome to our new program, Doug Holtz-Eakin. Doug, it's great to have you with us. I want to get right into this and ask about the economy and its recovery since COVID. We know that we had a crash because of COVID. Businesses shut down, people couldn't go to work. It was a disaster. Will we ever get back to what we might call normal?
Well, we've made a remarkable recovery. I mean, as you mentioned, the crash was unprecedented. We lost 20 million jobs in the month of April in 2020. That's 10 times more than the United States had ever lost in a single month ever. And if you look at the months of April, May, and June, the second quarter of 2020, the economy shrunk by as much as it did in the worst year of the Great Depression in 3 months. So that was a downturn of unprecedented speed and depth. And we have come back to the point where the unemployment rate, even though it's crept up, is 4%. We've had steady economic growth, and by and large, we're beginning to see people get some real wages, something that was missing for the past several years. So people at work, seeing their pay go up and allowing them to buy more, good news. It's taken a long time, but we're getting there.
You know, when all of this happened, we had a change of administration. This happened in the last year of Donald Trump's presidency. Then Joe Biden came in 2021. He has repeatedly said that he inherited the worst economy ever and that he fixed it. Is that a fair assessment, that Joe Biden fixed it and right now things are just doing wonderful?
I would dispute that. And I have the benefit here of having testified in the U.S. Senate on his American Rescue Plan prior to his passage in March of 2021. And what I'm going to say now, I said then. So this isn't 2020 hindsight. This is, he inherited an economy that was growing at 6.5% annual rate. That's roaring. It had seen the unemployment rate decline from well above 10% down to 6% and was soon going to be below 4%. So in terms of did you need to do something more, didn't look like the answer was yes to me. It was an economy that was getting back to nearly full employment, and it didn't need $2 trillion worth of stimulus. And certainly the things that were in that bill were not well designed. And so I said at the time, other people said at the time, this is going to cause problems, and the answer was a lot of inflation. That you can trace directly to the passage of that bill. It was really the match that lit the inflation fire. Everything we are seeing in the economy now that is of concern traces to that inflation. We still have some inflation. It's running at about 3.6%. Feels like more to people because their shelter inflation is still well above 5%. Food, energy, and shelter combined about half the budget. That's still running nearly 4%. So the inflation is still with us. And the things that the Federal Reserve is doing to fight the inflation are also with us. Higher interest rates, slower growth in jobs. Those are all bad news in and of themselves. So I don't think it's fair to say the president inherited a disaster and has somehow fixed it. He inherited an economy that was recovering quickly, and did some things that really got in the way. And that is something we're just now overcoming.
Douglas, how often does the government get in the way of an economy, whether it's either in growth or in recovery? Because sometimes it looks like that the more the government does to fix something, the worse it gets. It's almost like bringing in a mechanic that's never worked on what he's working on, and the result is often disastrous. When you were the head of the Congressional Budget Office, a lot of people may not understand that is a nonpartisan job. You work for both the Democrats and the Republicans, and your job is to give honest, straight up, non-political counsel and advice to both parties in Congress. So I want our audience to understand, I certainly would imagine you have political views, but most of your career has been spent not in the political realm, but genuinely in the objective economic realm. So having framed it that way, how often does government do more harm than good by trying to fix something?
Oh, I'd say the vast majority of times. And the biggest reason is timing. You've been a keen observer of government. You've led the government in Arkansas. You've watched the Congress for many, many years. And you know that even a well-intentioned Congress moves slowly. Our founders wanted it that way. You have to get a bill through the House, get it through the Senate, get them to agree on details, send it over to the president, figure out the implementation. By the time all that gets done, usually the problem they set out to solve has been fixed by the private sector many times over, and they're solving some problem that doesn't exist, and that creates a problem. And we see this again and again and again. And in the process, the government gets bigger, and when it gets bigger, it gets in the way as a matter of regular course. I think our biggest problem right now is the fact that we have not controlled the debt in the 21st century. It is in the way of the private sector, and we're not growing as rapidly as we could and should as a result. And that's just a testament to not having government do its job, be disciplined, take care of defending the country's borders, making sure that people are secure, and then letting the private sector take care of the economy.
I think that's as great of analysis as I've ever heard on why the government gets in the way, particularly because the government moves so slowly, and business has to move quickly. Government has no incentive to fix something. People get hired and they keep their jobs by continuing to oil the machinery of a problem. In the private sector, if you don't resolve something, and if the economy of that business doesn't grow, people get fired. So that was a great analysis. We need to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be hearing your thoughts on some of the economic problems. You brought up debt. That's something we'll have to get into here when we get back. And we are back. We're talking economy with Douglas Holtz-Eakin. And, Douglas, just before we took the break, we got into just a little bit about the debt. Our debt is $34 trillion. It's hard to even roll that off the tongue because it's such a staggering amount of money. And it has grown exponentially over the last 15, 20 years. What does that do to the American economy to have that big of a debt sitting on the backs of every American?
That debt is an enormous headwind to economic growth. And economists talk about growth all the time. And I'm going to give you some numbers here, and you're going to forget them, and you should. But in the 20th century, we grew at an average annual rate of 2.4% per year. That's income per person. What that meant in the real world is that the standard of living doubled every 29 years, roughly one working career. So my father, come out of the Navy, go to work at the steel mills in Pittsburgh, have a career, send me to college, send my sister and brother to college. That was their version of the American dream. In the 21st century, we've lost a percentage point of growth. And that means that the standard of living doubles every 56 years. And you have this sense of Americans everywhere seeing access to the American dream disappearing over the horizon. They're palpably concerned about it. And the debt is a big headwind to that growth. And the failure of our government to stabilize the debt at all in the 21st century, it has only gone up. It has only gone up relative to the size of the economy. That to me is the most pressing problem that we have. We need to come to terms with the debt.
When you mentioned that instead of doubling people's income over 29 years, people are now is taking twice as long. It occurs to me we hear news reports almost every day about Gen Z. They can't afford houses. If things don't change dramatically, they'll never be able to own a home. What does that do in terms of the long-term impact on people's lives, starting families, building equity, living, even believing there is an American dream?
Well, I mean, you don't see the impact of the debt on growth every day. It's tiny, and so it gets missed, but it adds up. And so the arithmetic is, if we'd kept growing the way we used to, everyone in the economy would have another $20,000 right now, every year. And so the Gen Z folks would have a down payment. They'd have the ability to pick a career based on their desires, not their needs. And it's a very different jumping off point. It gives people a greater confidence in not just themselves, but their government, their society. It unifies the country. Now we pull apart because people can't get what they want. And so I'm concerned that we've lost the discipline that gave us the things that pulled us together as a nation and unified us to go forward.
What's the way forward? What is maybe the formula, if there is one, or the steps to getting this economy turned around so that younger people in Gen Z can look at the future and say, yeah, we're going to make this work?
Yeah, everyone needs to do their job. It's not more complicated than that. So, do your job and not more. So state and local governments educate our children. Arrive at the workforce prepared to compete with a global economy that's out there, no matter whether we want to admit it or not. For the federal government, you don't do everything. You secure the nation's borders. You have a military that can keep us safe. You take care of the infrastructure, education, basic research, the things our forefathers saw as the role of government. And you don't pretend to be the private sector. You don't involve yourself in every business decision and finance every investment and tell them how to run their companies. And in the process, you have a lot better discipline on spending. Our debt problem is a spending problem, pure and simple. We have a lot of revenue, but we have way too much spending. So that discipline, doing the job and not more than the job and keeping the spending under control, is what the federal government needs to do.
Douglas, are you sure you're an economist? I mean, I'll just be honest with you. You make way too much sense. I'm used to having economists that speak in such terms that nobody can understand it. And I totally get what you're saying. And I'm thinking, I think he's got to be a fraud. There's no way this guy's an economist, because everything you say, I think our audience is sitting there at home, they're nodding their heads and they're saying, yes, that makes perfect sense. And it truly does. And I'm hoping that there will be more attention given to some of these fundamentals. Just before we take the break, here's a question for you. One of the things Donald Trump did when he was president, very different than Joe Biden, was a big focus on deregulating businesses, which meant take some of the burden away from businesses of the paperwork they have to fill out, of the government bureaucracies that they have to answer to, and spend time having them look over their shoulder. Democrats often said, well, he's just going to ruin everything, because that means these companies and these big corporations are going to do just horrible things. So unpack that for us. Is it a good thing to deregulate businesses, or is it really dangerous for us?
Well, I'll give you some staggering numbers, and I will be perfectly honest. I heard candidate Trump say that, and I, in my cynical way, said, no way. That's never been done, can't be done. In his 8 years in office, Barack Obama imposed $890 billion of regulatory costs on the economy. Now, that's a cost some private business has to pay, and that ends up in somebody's price. There's no way around that. Thus far in his one term, President Biden has imposed $1.6 trillion of regulatory costs on the economy. Same story. Someone's going to have to pay that cost. In 4 years in office, President Trump imposed count them, $60 billion in regulatory costs. And for 3 of those years, he actually went the other direction. COVID undid it a little bit at the end. It was an unbelievable U-turn on the regulatory state. And you could just see the impact, especially in the small business community. Small business enthusiasm went up dramatically. Confidence in hiring, investment immediately went up. This was way before taxes, way before other things he did. And I think his regulatory record is one of the strongest pieces of his economic record. And I really honestly didn't think he could do it, and he did, and it's something we need to really focus on again.
Great insight into even what's before us in the election. We've got to take another break. Fortunately, we do have another section with Doug and get more of his wise insights into what is a very challenged economy. Stay with us. We are back with Douglas Holtz-Eakin, and we're talking economy. We're actually doing a lot of listening today because he's making a lot of sense, and I, for one, deeply appreciate it. Doug, earlier we talked about spending. You said it was really the number one thing that makes it hard for the economy to recover, because Congress loves to spend money. They'll tell you that we've got to spend this money. It's important. We're doing great and wonderful things. We are doing the Lord's work by spending this money. To that, what would you say?
I think every congressman and every senator believes that what they're doing is a good thing. But that's not the right question. The question is it better than what you could have done with it, or my neighbor could have done with it, if we hadn't taken their tax dollars? The question is, what are you giving up in the private sector, where people get to decide what makes them happy? They can pursue their dream with their money, and then you take it away from them, and someone else decides on something else that maybe it's good, but it isn't really what you wanted. So that's the government getting in the way, right? It's not pursuing the right things because it's not responsive in real time to everything that people want. People know what they need on a daily basis. They can recalibrate on a daily basis. They can use their money very effectively. It has to be something really good to make it worth taking it from them and using it in the government setting.
You know, it almost sounds like that if we ever have another pandemic, instead of closing the businesses and letting Congress continue to meet, we should close Congress and leave all the businesses open. We might recover much more quickly. Would we ever, we only have about a minute, so would we ever again, in a pandemic or a crisis, shut businesses down to the degree we did, and somebody think that that was a good idea?
No, and we shouldn't have. Indeed, there were disaster response plans prepared in the early 2000s when I was in government and involved that said you only close businesses if a regional health system is overwhelmed completely. And that wasn't going on. They were preemptively shutting businesses in places where the hospital systems were fine. And so an enormous number of mistakes were made, and it cost us enormously. You could have gotten 90% of the protection by distancing and masks and being a little bit careful. And instead, we went way too far, enormous economic and social cost.
I heard one of the health experts make the comment. He said it's the first time in all of human history when we've had some type of pandemic when we isolated the people who were healthy rather than only isolating the people who were sick. And that was a revelation. Another revelation we've had is just having this visit with you. Doug, thank you for being here today. It's an absolute delight. Like I said, and I meant it, you're one of those economists, there's only a handful who make sense. And truly you do. It's been an enlightening conversation. Hope to have you